Plugin of the week is the Universal Audio in conjunction with Brainworx BX Subsynth. The BX Subsynth is a very cool plugin. It's not an emulation of, but it's influenced by the DBX 120 XP. This is a subharmonic synthesizer. You may have heard of effects, psychoacoustic effects, where you can sort of fool the brain into thinking there's low end, and those things are very cool. So there are plugins that are out that do that type of thing, and there's also other plugins that do subsynth kind of stuff. But there was something very unique about this DBX device. It was used by a lot of DJs and actually found its way into the studio. I actually stumbled across an engineer who had one, saw it, and then bought one immediately and started using it in studio. And the one problem I had with it, because mostly for the records that I worked on, I was dealing with a lot of electric bass and acoustic kick drum, and I would find it a way to kind of add in some sub frequency, to add in some power, some pop, and it also worked really, really well for like dance records and club records and stuff like that. And you could also work with it in certain synth sounds and things like that, where you could kind of artificially create low end. And what DBX had done is they had, researched this way to essentially create like subharmonics below instruments. And this was a way of adding low end. And because low end is such a very difficult thing to kind of manage, this would actually be like sometimes, if it's just not naturally there, you can't even necessarily EQ it into place. And a lot of the tools, unlike what you have with equalization and some tools today, makes, with, control of radical resonant filters and things like that. That type of stuff didn't really exist in any kind of usable platform, for the most part. There were tools that would do stuff like that. But so this became a really unique kind of tool that was used quite a lot. And so what you have here on this, and now this plugin actually exists both on the UAD platform and also at the Plugin Alliance as a native plugin, so you can purchase it either way. What we have here is basically a global section. This is primarily setting input-output levels, your wet-dry mix, and then you can decide here at the synthesis input whether you want the mid signal to feed the subharmonic engine, or you want both. In this case, it's in a stereo instantiation just on a drum loop, so we'll kind of go through some examples with this, or whether you want the stereo to go through. And so sometimes with a lot of stuff, it by default is set to mid, especially if you're on a stereo track. Most of the time you kind of want that mid energy to kind of be kind of occupied in the middle or maintained in the middle. There's also an MS section, which of course, what would a BX plugin be without the mono maker? So we got a mono maker here, which allows us to mono up frequencies below a given setting. So sometimes like 200 cycles, something like that ends up being kind of good. But you could kind of, depending upon the effect in the instrument, or whatever track you have it on, you can go higher or lower or whatever, and kind of work with it. And you can also increase the width of the stereo signal out by as much as 400%. So it gives you some ability to kind of play within the stereo field, MS style. Okay, so it wouldn't be a BX plugin without that. So here you have the subharmonics. Now what this is a main global level control for all the synthesized frequencies. So the original had 2 frequency engines. This has a third one, which adds in this one here, the 56 to 80 hertz. So what you have is these subharmonic engines that work between 24, 36, 36 to 56, and then 56 to 80. And sometimes this can work better for synths or sounds that have a little bit higher frequency energy, where this is kind of too far below the spectrum of what they're able to grab and kind of synthesize properly. And I'll kind of show you how this works. You can actually solo up. Now this doesn't solo just the sub. What it does is it will solo it in exclusion of the other two, so you can hear what each one does in exclusion to the other. Okay, so that's really what that is, and I'll show you that in an example. And there's also a really cool feature, which is the trim feature, and this allows you to feed a proper amount of level into each of these different engines as you kind of blend or mix them in for the individual track. So this becomes really, really important. This is a really important setting, and because it determines how much the engine is going to grab onto, and I'll show you how that's going to be a really, really cool feature. Over here you have a distortion engine. So you have 2 types of distortion, smooth or harsh. The squeeze, which actually shows up as a level, in the manual. So I'm not sure if that's a misprint here or there, but essentially it's an amount percentage of it, and then you have a drive control. So the drive control determines like how much you're actually pushing the overload or the drive or the distortion based on the type of distortion. This is probably, although it doesn't say anything about it, first and second order harmonics, something along those lines, or odd and even harmonics where you get a smooth or harsh type of thing. And then you can filter here, high cut, low cut filter, where that distortion occurs. You can kind of focus it within a particular area and then mix that in amount-wise in parallel along with the main signal. And I'm going to talk about the signal flow in a second. There's also a tight punch thing. Now, what this does is it's a Butterworth filter, a sixth order Butterworth filter. And what that means in English is that you basically have a resonant high pass filter, and so what it does, it resonates at the frequency that you're selected, and this is actually prior to all the processing. So in the signal flow, what you have is an input gain. You have this resonant filter at the beginning, then you have the subharmonic stage, and then after that you have a low end, and this determines the relative amount of low frequency energy and high frequency, or I'm sorry, low frequency energy. You could either add to it or subtract from it, and it's centered around 55 hertz. So when you kind of work with that, that kind of gives you like an area where you can sort of control the overall amount of low end. So what happens is that you get a blend of this all mixed in. So you have a mix control that allows you to, I'm sorry, and then also there's the distortion section, which runs completely in parallel to this. So this is just in addition to what's going on with the signal. So here you can take the whole bloody mess, whatever it is, and control the input signal unaffected with the affected signal and have some kind of balance of that. So it's worth taking a minute to look at the manual and look at the signal flow chart just so you can get an idea of what's going on. But otherwise, very cool. All right, so let's listen to a loop. I'm just going to bypass this here. I'll use the Plugin Alliance bypass and see what we got. So you can see here there's not a lot of sub-frequency, very little going in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by sweeping up here. It helps if I put it in, sorry. It's the little things, like why don't I hear anything? Starts to kind of kick in right in there. You can hear it a little bit. This is kind of in this case, sometimes it's very dramatic. In this case, it's somewhat subtle because there's not a lot there, but it'll probably give enough here in the subharmonic engine to kind of grab onto. So I'm going to leave this here. I'm not going to mess with the MS or anything yet because I want to show you what the mid-side stuff does here. And then we'll start with the engines. Now, when you work with the synthesized frequencies, you decide, or you can work with any or all of them. And one of the most important tools here is this trim tool, because there's an LED right below here, right below that trim pot on each of them. And the amount that you feed in is if you want this, in other words, to light up sort of a white or light blue color. And when it comes in, this determines, it gives the engine, the subharmonic synthesis engine, something to kind of chew on to create. So, and this becomes important, and I'll show you why in a second. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to kind of feed an amount in here. So you could see there's already a reasonable amount in there. All right, so we kind of got this. So these guys are going in. Now I can mix in. So if I mix in this, you could hear like that sub frequency there created for the kick drum, but now if I drive it, it stops. you can see how I can almost control the sustain by adjusting the level going in and kind of get that to hold out, be a tight low end or right. And so I'm just kind of, you can use that to kind of drive more signal in. So so I'll leave that there and then kind of work with this one here just to kind of show you. Let's actually go to this one here because it's the next frequency spectrum up. So you can see how this is not as sub frequency, you know, even though it's a pretty low range. Right, that's the real sub stuff. Right, so it's just like sometimes what'll happen here when you start to use this is you'll find that each one may capture certain aspects of the sound that you want to include in the low end. And sometimes they'll be somewhat ineffective, or they won't grab anything that is worth your while, right? So you leave them out, or you mix them in just enough if it's giving you some character that you kind of like. Maybe it helps to balance out that sub to help it connect more with the original sound. So let me go over here. So sometimes this on this can actually sometimes be like a good power range, you know, in for kick drums and snare drums and other instruments, where you actually get more of the power that translates through a majority of speaker systems, whereas this is going to generate or kind of push through more in subs, right? So remember, this is not psychoacoustics. This is actual frequency content that's being created here and added in. So let's see if we can get a blend between these two. So that's without. Now I can either drive these individually, or if I got like the balance that I've got with them, I can use this to determine how much of this I want to mix in with the original signal. Okay, so this is like what percentage of this is getting added in. I can also control the overall low end, although that's centered around a particular frequency. So this is more of an EQ. Right, so you can really hear how that kind of drives things. Now, just to show you something here, if I switch this to stereo, see how you can start to get, like, in certain things it'll start to grab because the left and right are feeding separate synthesis engines. So it may actually get, like, where in certain things you start to get some things. So it depends on the sound. Like if you have like a big bass synth or something like that that is a little bit thin or doesn't quite have that low resonance that you really want, you can kind of put that in. And then in stereo, because it already is stereo and already has that movement, it will help to enhance that movement and kind of follow and work along with it. Whereas with something like this, you're more inclined, you know, if you're dealing with that, to, you know, to kind of drive that through the mono maker. Right, you could just hear just by switching that how it kind of drives that better, you know. And then so maybe I'll just gonna put that around 200. And I can start to spread some of the other higher frequency stuff out, and then it stops. Beautiful. One of the things you have to be careful about is it's easy to get very happy with all that low frequency energy and then just kind of drive everything, and then it's like and then there's also a drive control here. So you can see, you can get a good sense of what's going on there. So let's just kind of, so I could drive something. Maybe I want to drive some distortion, some mid-range here. I'm just kind of, let's try to kind of work this into the low end and see what I got here. Start getting creative here and creating some alternate sounds. Just to kind of, you can round it out, and this can sound like you could use it as a subtle way to kind of, meld it a little bit, or blend it a little bit in, with the natural sound. So this is also, kind of a cool addition here. And then you got the low end, cut on this. Very, very cool. I mean, this is just like one simple example. When you start putting it on things like kick drums and basses, keyboard instruments, sometimes you'll just get a mix where you have a bass sound or something, and it just kind of lacks, a bit of that, really, really super sub low end, or maybe you just want to bring that in for just a particular note or a particular section for, huge effect. You could use it on special effects. So if you're using things like explosions in a mix, or thunder and things like that, and you just really want that rumbling low end, it works really well in that world too. And then it's something that you just experiment. I mean, this is like just some little simple loop, just as an example, but as you start digging into lots of different sounds, you'll start to see where it can really, really be powerful in a very musical way too. I remember having that original piece, and it was a really, really, really cool unit. Eventually I sold it. Eventually I got like fed up with it, or just too much, or kind of moved on to some other things, or decided I wasn't using it, and but I sold it very quickly, and a lot of people were really into them. And it's kind of cool to have something like that, where you get that integrated into a plugin and an interface where you can kind of use that even if you've never seen the original piece. It was very, very helpful for me at the time, and a really valuable piece, I think, as a plugin as well. And there you have it. Through UAD platform, and also in the native platform. It's by Brainworx in conjunction with Universal Audio. In this audio example, the BX Subsynth. That is the plugin of the week.